Sustainable futures don't happen by chance. They're shaped by inclusive leadership, dialogue, and the partnerships across systems. Welcome to Conversations on Sustainable Futures. I am Daniela Bas. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, in whichever part of the world you are. Today's conversation goes straight to the heart of global governance. What happens when the system designed to guarantee peace, multilateralism, begins to fracture? And what role can Europe still play in a world increasingly driven by power, perception, and the short-term alliances? So, to explore this, I'm joined by Dr. Maria Rosaria Iorio. She is a political analyst with working experience across the European Commission, Africa, and the World Trade Union, as well as the United Nations system in itself. And she brings a rare combination of field experience, institutional insight, and strategic clarity on one of the defining questions of our times. Is multilateralism system evolving or dissolving? Hello, Maria Rosaria. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me for this conversation.
Maria Rosaria, I usually start with my guests with what I call a jolly question. Listen carefully.
Yes.
You work on some of the most complex global issues. But what is something simple, personal, or even irrational that always helps you regain clarity when the world feels chaotic?
Usually I listen to my breathing, I come back to myself and tell myself that everything will get better and that even the worst moments are only cyclical, so cycles change, next cycle will be better.
So you try to center yourself. I like
Yes.
it.
Yes.
Well, Maria Rosaria Iorio, as I said, is a political analyst, a European expert with over 2 decades of experience across the European Commission, the UN ecosystem, the world trade. So from Brussels to Africa, she has shaped policy, managed complex programs, and trained leaders on governance and development. And her work explores a world in transition, where multilateralism is under pressure and new global power dynamics are redefining peace, trade, and international cooperation. Amazing professional background. So, Maria Rosario, in your analysis, we are moving from a rule-based world, I think of international law and the rule of law, to a perception-driven one. What does this shift mean for the credibility of institutions like the UN and the European Union?
Well, thank you for this very central question. I think that in reality, this move toward perception, it's only temporary. We have seen this trend already in the past, and then we have come back to rule-based. So I like to use the example of waves of the ocean. They come and go. The crisis of the legitimacy of the United Nations, although it has started a few years ago, I think it's also related to a different vision of the multilateral and international relations by the big powers of this world. I hope that with time, the perception-based move will fade away and that the European Union will also find a more central space in the world.
From your analysis, are there some examples you can share with us that helped the wave to go back to believing in the rule of law and multilateralism? Is there an example you can share with us?
Well, we used to take in international relations the example of the post-Second World War, where of course states realized that there was a need for a common forum of discussion, and that's how the United Nations at that time found its own existence. In the meantime, I think because we have seen for a while peace, although in the recent years this trend has changed. Maybe major states have disengaged from these international organizations, believing that they can do better alone and also faster. It's true that the challenge for this multilateral fora is the time, because processes are long and sometimes slow. But I believe the slowness and time can guarantee better stability than fast and quick solutions.
Well, yeah, also based on my past experience within the United Nations, it may seem slow, but actually it requires many meetings, encounters, negotiations among all countries to find a common denominator. That's why it takes long, but then it gives a strong foundation. I tend to agree with you. So based on your experience, also with the European Development Fund, if you can explain also in a few words what it is for those who might not be familiar. Based on this experience and the EDF, the European Development Fund, what explains the gap we often see between ambition at institutional level and results on the ground?
Thank you. This is a very strategic question. Actually, it's a very challenging one because I know that the public often questions international development. So for us who are in this world since many years now, it's always a challenge. The European Development Fund actually is the financing tool of the Accordo Cotonou, which basically frames the relationship between the European Union and the Africa, Caribbean, Pacific states. So it's an agreement that deals with trade issues as well as with social and development policies. Now, the question of the gap between ambition and results, I think it can be nuanced because there have been a number of results, but of course, as any human initiative, it's not perfect. Of course, there are spaces for improvement. However, in the same philosophy of the questions we just answered a few minutes ago, this was a very interesting framework for dialogue between two different regions. Actors had to make an effort to talk to each other and try to understand each other coming from very different backgrounds. So I think that in that sense, also sometimes these relations have been tensed. Many results have been positive. As far as development of countries in Africa is concerned, of course, the agreement could not solve the whole issues because the issues are complex and they are not only related to international relations but also to national policies, national challenges. And so the combination between international and national sometimes can give quite complex framework. But I think that it has given a lot of results in the sense of creating a framework for listening to each other and for Europe to better understand a faraway continent as Africa.
For those who are not familiar with what development means, you can explain how it works. An example, a simple one.
Well, there's been a period of infrastructure, there are lots of roads. For example, the funds are planned for a period of at least 5 years, and then the national government decides which priorities have to be put in the national indicative program, and from there projects are designed and approved and then implemented. The way of working has been through procurement procedures, if it is a project that concerns infrastructure, services or furniture, and then in the other part there is grants, which is more for civil society. And so there's always been this idea of keeping transparency, equality of treatment, non-discrimination, and proportionality as main key principles for implementation of projects.
And for those who wonder, what is the European interest in supporting projects in other countries outside Europe? What could we reply to this question? Also to the private sector.
Yeah, it's interesting that you ask this question in terms of interest, because there was a time this was rather an issue of solidarity. I can see we have shifted slowly from the idea of solidarity into interest and private sector initiatives. So this is definitely a very important political shift and change of vision. I know that even the vision of solidarity has been often criticized because within solidarity you can still have an interest. But the idea here was to basically try to rebalance the imbalances created by historical factors.
To reduce the gap of inequalities, right?
Inequalities, yes, economic disparities between the two continents, also give access to products from Africa to the European markets, and creating a local dynamic for local enterprises to face the challenging of exports.
So people feel well in their own country. That was also one of the reasons, I think, to promote social policies, not only economic and financial policies, right?
Well, in principle, yes, the idea was to create employment and jobs, and also regional and sub-regional integration of countries. However, because the region has a structural constraint that comes from basically very similar economic structures of countries within the African region, this export strategy has not really been very successful because there is not much to be exported to European markets. However, the challenge is a long-term challenge, and of course work is still done to reach that level. But let's also remember that trade is a competitiveness sector. It's not solidarity. We have some contradictions, of course, also in the international arena between being competitive and also being in solidarity. So there has to be a balance. I think in these last few years the balance has more gone toward competitiveness.
So thinking about leaders, you know that I'm devoting many episodes to leadership and women, and you are among them. I would like to ask you a question concerning leaders. When leaders talk about security or growth, social policies rarely make the headlines, unfortunately.
Yes.
But can a country really be strong if too many people are left behind?
No, I think that, of course, for us, the issue of leaving people behind, it's again a vision of what kind of society we want to have. And
We Western countries, you mean?
Yes, what type of society we want to live in. I think that for social policy there needs to be a will or a vision to make these policies work and be on top of the agenda. It has to be a will decision. If we are only based on liberalism and liberal political and economic policies, of course social policies they get behind because they are not providing any immediate results, and the well-being of people is not it's not something you can visualize in concrete terms. So it's not like economic growth and GDP that you can quantify. Poverty only becomes an issue when poor people create trouble for those who are in more privileged positions. Otherwise, if they are unseen, in reality the system goes on without them. So I totally agree with you that, of course, in the long run, it's not sustainable. However, for many leaders, it doesn't seem to be a priority because the priority is more on economic growth.
You mentioned sort of invisible people left behind. Here I have a question. What is the price paid, I think, of persons with disabilities or women around the world, particularly in some countries more than others, but still, when policies are only market-oriented?
Well, they are excluded from the system, and then you see, for example, let's take the issue of population growth that you hear more and more in Europe. People wonder why there is no more population growth. I think that is because the liberal policies have basically left behind all the parts of the system that sustain women's access to jobs, baby care. You see, so the result is that either you choose to go to work or you choose to make children, because Having a child, as we all know as women, takes time, effort, energy, and so unless the society is ready to open that space, of course the choice is probably going to be, okay, I will wait longer, and maybe after I wait too long because of nature constraints, it does not happen anymore, or because also there is too much stress in the workplace because of competition. So these issues of then impact also maybe in an unforeseen manner the liberal policies.
Maybe in Northern Europe, there are more services offered to women who are working, and maybe in Southern Europe a bit less.
I don't want to put it as a relationship of causal effect, but probably in the Northern Europe there are more children, born
Yes.
in. Yes, yes. So these are some of this is a practical issue for disabilities, or for disabled people. It's access to jobs, it's access to buildings, it's access to facilities. If there is not a positive action towards these groups, they get excluded from the liberal mechanism, because the liberal economy needs people who can play only one type of role, which is be competitive. So being competitive means your total life, your total time is dedicated to your job and to be competitive.
In your view, Maria Rosaria, has multilateralism really failed, or sticking to leaders, have leaders stopped believing in it when it no longer serves short-term interests?
Well, I think that multilateralism has not failed. Multilateralism has played a role and still plays a role in dialogue and peace building. However, what changes now is probably the vision of some leaders who want quick solutions, simple solutions for difficult problems, which means that you might take a quick action and then you try to solve what comes ex post, meaning after you took the action. Multilateralism has a different philosophy, which is, as you say, we negotiate before we take action, we explore options, possibilities, dangers before we move. So I feel that this era is based on action. So you first act and then want things afterwards. But for multilateralism, you need patience, you need to take into account multiple perspectives of states, different visions, different fears, and of course then you need someone who can make a synthesis of all these spectrum of different ideas, and now decide which decision might match the most of the countries. But if you go for only one or two big groups of countries, of course, it might not be of interest, because you might think that if you go on your own, you will go faster. I believe that in international relations, going fast is not what matters. What matters is to find sustainable solutions for peace, because in reality, everyone wants to live in a world where there is peace.
I couldn't agree more. As trade becomes more political, what should European companies change now to stay competitive but without losing their values?
Well, I think that you see, there are two different levels. There is the action of companies, and from what I see, companies continue to struggle to stay on board. I think that what is a bit missing is a stronger positioning of the European Union in some particular cases to guarantee a more stable and predictable system. So it is as if our leaders, in the perspective which I totally understand, which is to have a dialogue with the partners, have sometimes accepted situations and tariff escalation which was not to be accepted. And maybe because also there has not been enough time to think about alternative solutions. So enterprises are left a little bit on their own, trying to find their own solutions. And again, I think that in the rule-based system, each actor has a role to play. You have the governments have a role to play in terms of stabilizing the internal market. They have a role in international rules to stabilize the international rules in terms of exporting, in terms of technical rules for enterprises to be active on the international markets. And then, of course, enterprise has to work as a money-making actor in terms of going to look for new markets. But enterprises alone, they cannot work properly. And this you can see also in the countries with a weaker level of development. Many small entrepreneurs, enterprises, they make an effort to move ahead. But at one point, there is the lack of support by local authorities for them to go to the next level of competitiveness. And I feel that we are facing the same type of challenges in Europe. In some cases, enterprises have to fight on their own because that framework that existed until a few years ago, it seems to be fading away. Maybe in this perception-based system that you mentioned in the very beginning, that we have to do things quickly. I'm not sure that this is the way to go and to move forward.
So there is the need to have this ecosystem where each role and ingredient is properly balanced and moves smoothly as much as possible.
Yes, because enterprise on its own cannot go much further if the international system, and we have seen the conference in the WTO that took place in Yaoundé, it has not been easy because when you have the major actors moving away from the multilateral system, then it fragmented, and in the fragmentation you always have someone who loses because there is no more predictability, there is lack of clarity. Of course, enterprises will survive, but the price to pay seems to be quite high.
Well, I would like to dig it further with you, but we are moving now to the second part of our conversation, talking about past, present, and future. So, once upon a time, multilateralism was seen as the backbone of global peace. So, from your experience at WTO, the World Trade Organization, and the European Commission, when did the narrative begin to shift and why?
Well, I think that the narrative for the trade policy part began to shift in 2001 with the Doha Development Agenda failure to achieve an agreement. Maybe even before there have been some ups and downs, but there was still a way to move ahead. We did stand still. I think that what has happened is solidarity has definitely faded away. And probably the major actors have started thinking that this system was too costly for them. It took too long. And so they started moving more and more towards bilateral agreements, regional agreements. This allows them to solve the issues that they think they are of major interest for them. So I see the starting point there, maybe with ups and downs, and this wave that comes and goes. And then, of course, politically, I think also there has been a major shift in the last 10 years in terms of what type of world we want to have. As you said, there has been the narrative for many years that if countries trade among themselves, there are more chances for peace. And now we have realized that trade is used as a tool to basically, in brackets, punish countries. So it has become something different than what it was supposed to be in the beginning. But I think that also it is somehow, as they say in French, une mort annoncée. Why? Because over time there has been a sort of international negotiations fatigue, investing time, efforts, and maybe in a period of crisis, it is difficult to keep the match between the global interest and the national interest. So in this period, I think we are shifting towards again national interest. But also we see already that there are some lights in the tunnel, because some countries have now shifted again into a more kind of regional perspective. So it's a matter of patience. I would read it that way. It will come back. But my fear is that in the meantime, the vulnerable groups might have paid a high price for these years of push towards a totally liberalized system.
While waiting for the wave to slow down and go back to a better place for everyone, if we think about the present in a world that is increasingly shaped by power dynamics rather than shared rules, in your view, what concrete role can Europe play to revitalize multilateralism through the United Nations, not only as a political project, but also as a credible system for peace? You mentioned peace, equity, and also global governance.
Well, this is a very challenging question, but the potential for Europe is very big. Europe has a sort of support by other countries that sometimes we do not imagine, we do not see. Countries outside Europe have a high expectation from this bloc of countries, because the European Union is still seen as a sort of counterbalance in terms of vision of the world. I would like to see this regional bloc more convinced of the place that it can have in international relations. Sometimes I feel we are afraid of ourselves, as if we are hesitating. Maybe it's the culture of the continent. We use this doubt philosophy to question ourselves, but sometimes we go a bit too far in this questioning. So I would like to have a continent that is more affirmative, more convinced of its values, and that also has left behind a sort of dichotomy between the discourse and the action, have a bigger coherence between what we say and what we do, and what we implement in terms of policies outside the continent. I believe that this is a continent that has a great potential, of course with sometimes a history that has been quite complex, but we have also the capacity to do self-criticism, to have to analyze ourselves. One point I think the continent has to stop analyzing and move towards action.
Act.
Yes, move towards a concrete action. And sometimes even symbolic actions are very important, because the rest of the world is looking at us, is waiting for this continent to take a position in the big issues that are now on top of the agenda.
I believe that somehow we're witnessing a transition of global governance, somehow, somewhere. And imagine that you are going to be 20 years old in 2071. In what kind of global system would you want to live?
I would like to live in a more optimistic world with people who believe in the possibility of improving the world. I'm realizing that there is a lot of pessimism, there is a lot of destructive thinking. I think it's very important to shift toward constructive not positive thinking, but constructive in the sense of let's try to see what are the solutions we can find together and move ahead with them. But coming back to the issue of equality and social justice that has a little bit been forgotten in all these processes, I would like to see a world that is more balanced, with less inequalities, with the youth even in African countries having more options, more possibilities to improve their lives. And for this, I think we have a collective responsibility, even when we remain silent in situations we know we should not be silent. Of course, I can understand there is fear. I totally understand the process. However, sometimes we need courage. We need also taking positions that are maybe uncomfortable, but being uncomfortable is what might bring us to move a step ahead. So
we said Europe is really central. So where should Europe act tomorrow morning? And I'm asking you this question to you as a political analyst. Concretely, if it wants to remain relevant globally? One suggestion.
It has to take a clear position vis-à-vis our transatlantic relation. I think this is fundamental. Try to reshape a global position as a union and not as different countries talking in different situations. This is also something very important. This is a European Union, but sometimes in its political arena it seems more a European disunion because you have different positions, different countries saying different things. So something maybe also in internal reflection might be necessary to speak more one voice. So for me it is first of all reshaping, rebalancing the transatlantic relation. The second thing is to come back to what our major values, our fundamental values were, namely social justice, social dialogue, non-discrimination. So these issues are very important, and I would like to hear a bit more about these words. Even in the media, we hear other things, but not these ones. So for me, these are the values that have basically created the European Union, and I would like to see them back in a more vocal way. And also, the other part is the external relations, particularly with Africa. Continue the dialogue, although I can understand it's tiring and it is sometimes time-consuming. But I would like Europe to come back to the dialogue based on partnership, but not only economic partnership, but also human partnership. So trying to really see what can be done globally. Because of course there are some things that have to be done nationally, this is clear. But there are some other structural factors that need all the countries to act. And I would like also this part now to be taken on board and see concretely what actions we can take to help countries, sustain countries and populations to get a better life.
If someone wants to deepen this conversation with you, Maria Rosaria Iorio can be found in LinkedIn, and I think that you will get quite a few people contacting you because this is a top topic, particularly nowadays. So if there is one message to take from today's conversation, in my view, it is this. Multilateralism is not outdated. It's maybe finished, and the real question is not whether we need it. The question is who is willing to lead it forward and how. Maria Rosaria Iorio, I thank you so much for helping us navigate complexity with clarity.
Thank you for inviting me. This was a great opportunity. Thank you very much.
Goodbye. Thank you to my guests and to all of you for listening. New episodes are released on the first and the third Saturday of every month. Music by Damien Morton. Social media production by Create More Studio. I'm Daniela Bas, and this conversation continues.